Hello, everyone. I'm Becca, dietitian by trade, mom 24/7, wife from the start, and when there's a few extra hours in the day, you might find me hitting the trails or on horseback.
And I'm Kara, a therapist to women, a mom to a boy, an entrepreneur, mountain junkie, and a postpartum runner.
And this is Fit for a Queen, a podcast that's devoted to the female athlete wanting to balance the teeter-totter of all the things we desire out of life as women: performance, health, intellect, and taking time for self, even if we only get 1 minute out of the day.
We're so excited to be bringing you the queens in the athletic world who have done just that. Okay, ladies, take a seat at your thrones, grab your crowns, and welcome to Fit for a Queen. We have Samantha Livingstone on with us today. She's an Olympic gold medalist, high-performance consultant, speaker, and mental health activist. At home in the classroom, Samantha spent 6 years teaching high school science and coaching swimming. After a near-death experience with her then 12-month-old daughter, Samantha knew it was time to pay forward all she'd learned about achievement, mental illness, and rising from failure and finding happiness. In 2016, Samantha founded Livingstone High Performance and the Whole Athlete Initiative in response to the mental health crisis impacting adolescents across the globe. LHP provides pillars of support to organizations, teams, and individuals to elevate mental health and improve performance. Welcome, Samantha.
All right, queens, this is going to be a lot of fun. We have, I joke, a repeat offender back on.
Don't know how we talked you into coming back on the podcast.
That we love dearly, Samantha Livingstone. Samantha, what have you been up to?
Oh, my goodness. I'm so grateful to be here with you and reconnecting and chatting. Oh, what have I been up to? Well, I finally was able to be in person, which is exciting this fall after 18 months of not traveling.
Wow.
And my kids are back at school, so there's that.
Oh,
So, yes.
Again, the things that we're thankful for this year, which are huge, right? In person, and the children are in school. Those are big things.
Yes.
I don't know about you, but I found public speaking, there's those studies where they talk about where kids have to look at mother's facial expressions, and if she's smiling, they're okay. If not, then they start to cry. I don't know how to public speak when everybody's covered up with a mask. You're trying to go, what are their eyes doing? Are they looking? Mm-hmm. So,
it's weird social interactions right now.
It's such a trade-off, right? Because on Zoom, the energy there is hard to read.
Yes.
Although I felt like I got kind of a hang of it, but then right when you were in the room, so I was presenting in person, and the kids were. But I think and it's not an either or. I think you can. I think it forces us to pay attention to eyes in a different way. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to find the silver lining.
Absolutely. Doing mental health sessions with a client with a mask. I am asking more questions about so how are we doing over there? I can't tell from your eyes. I just need a little bit more information. So yeah, weird times.
So tell us, how did your life kind of have to pivot? I mean, that's my favorite word, pivot during the pandemic. Somebody should write a book on that.
Totally.
Pivoting.
How did you have to pivot, and how are you keep pivoting?
Yeah. So the first major pivot was that sports stopped. I mean, school, first we were just out, and that was kind of, actually it offered us a chance. We were coming off of hockey season, and so it offers us a chance to exhale and be together and not drive. And then that downtime in the afternoon of okay, so I'm doing this thing with the girls for their school during the day, and then we were home. So it was this moment of a pause, really, right? Of, okay. A lot of my work prior to the pandemic was my one-on-one clients have been virtual. So I've been Zooming before Zoom became a verb that everyone knows, right? So that part was real, but then the cascade of all the in-person events that I had booked, including what we were talking about doing in Kansas City, it was just this cascade of cancellations for the rest of 2020. So some of them pivoted to virtual, most didn't. And then I just actually was able to complete one that was booked for 2020, and then we did it outside at a football field. So that felt really good.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it was kind of that mixed, the combination of that both and with our daughter and her history of her heart condition. So it was just we just didn't know a lot. It was thrusted into that uncertainty of not knowing. And then, there's an upside to it. And then also there was hard to it. So yeah, we've been through a lot collectively, for sure.
Remind us again, how old are your kiddos?
So my oldest is 11 and a half. So we got a middle schooler, 6th grade. And then the twins are going to be 9 on Halloween, which is wild. And they are in 3rd grade. And then my kindergartner, who's going on 25.
Sure.
She's off to school full day. So she's 5. Oh my goodness.
So you are negotiating a lot of virtual schooling for a lot of kids in one house. I am sensing that was probably difficult.
Didn't you shift and you actually homeschooled last year?
So I did. So the spring was, so some of their challenges individually, it was wet, like the anxiety was through the roof with the virtual component. And, and like the teachers were doing the best they can. I'm an educator at my core, and I had such compassion, and also it was just such a hard time. So we did make the decision where I homeschooled all 4 for a little while, and until April actually. And I'll be honest, it was so much work. It was like another full-time job on top of running a business, and I loved it. I absolutely loved that time with them. So we transformed our bonus room into like a little school room, and then we just worked units together, and we adventured, and I will treasure that time, because when they get bigger, you spend, it's just like the relationship shifts with how you spend time with them. So,
Yeah, I think you're right. The both and it's like, yes, it's really hard. And this is such a special time too. How have you been transitioning back with, kids back in school? How's that been feeling for you?
So great.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest.
Oh, please be honest. I mean, every mom around the world is saying that. Go to school.
Even the kids, I think, were like, I want to go to school.
Oh, sure. Missing their friends.
They miss their friends. Yeah. I think that's been going back. So there was a lot of like unschooling that we did, which ties directly into the work I do, I feel like, in the world, which is like, there's so many rules. And I think in so many ways, school perpetuates and really cultivates perfectionism. It's like, if you just do this thing the right way, then you'll get rewarded with an A or like with a check plus, and so that part, that's been a little bit of an adjustment, because we really, I had the flexibility to really have things be driven from them. So that's been an adjustment for them. But the time for me, I love this. So the one thing that went for me was my writing. So my bandwidth was so maxed that the creative space was, I couldn't tap into it. I just didn't have the bandwidth to do that. So that's been coming back, which feels really good.
Yeah. The stuff that we had to put on the shelf a little bit to just to kind of get through.
Yeah, and your blogs keep it real. So hopefully everybody will sign up. I love your blogs. Yeah, your writing.
Nice. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, there's a few brewing.
I bet you're coming out with them now. One thing I noticed, thank goodness the Summer Olympics was finally going. And I don't know about you guys, but I was able to watch so much more than I typically do. I usually always watch, but again, being holed up a little bit more. And I think this year, some themes that I loved, like motherhood and the Olympics and mental health, were things that I was following too. So tell us through your experience how you felt the discussion around mental health during the Olympics might influence change in sport. Tell me a little bit about your experience with some of these things coming out, watching the Olympics this year.
It was so amazing, and to watch with my girls.
Yeah.
To see, and I have 2 little, my little 5-year-old, and then Mia, who's one of the twins, they love gymnastics. And so we read Simone's books, and they've just followed her story. And so to be able to watch her hold a boundary, which is how I see it. Like she said, she was saying, this is not okay. Like, I'm not okay. So this is what I'm going to do, was so profound. And then to watch Naomi in a similar way in the tennis arena, to be able to name and experience what they were, to show us what a boundary looks like to be held. And then the kind of ripple effect, there's like this, the people who have been doing this work, who are fighting for the advocacy and trying to create this culture change, are saying, we're nodding our heads like, yes. And then it felt like, in some ways, like whiplash for those who are not there yet on that journey of understanding and really seeing mental health as the same as physical health. And so boundaries can feel like, when we're not used to them, so abrupt, like almost offensive. And I think that that's kind of the, so seeing some of the way that that was reflected. And, I try not to read comments, and then I'm human too. So I'm like, I also go in to see what people are, how they're responding. Cause then I feel like it shines a light on what we like the work we've got to do. Yeah. I mean, I think it was courage in action. So it was boundary setting and courage in action. And then for mainstream media to be talking about it, I think is a massive step too. So I feel like we're at a point where, I can't see us moving back. Like, I think there'll be this whiplash effect and kind of people coming out and saying, oh, this is what happens, right? We get soft and washed up, then we lose medals. And then when you really work with people and pin them down, like most humans, when at the end of the day, care about humans, like I think that's something that traveling again and being with humans, like we can lose sight of that when we're on social media. It can feel so divisive. And then when you're with people, you're like, oh, like humans are actually, for the most part, like people are kind and good and decent, And so at the end of the day, I feel like when you are able to connect with someone past that first reaction, and it can open, that can be a model and an opening to help expand someone in the way that they see mental health and hear us talk about it. So it was such an awesome experience to be able to walk through and witness.
And I really liked how they had Michael Phelps as a commentator because, I think everybody always thinks it's the pressure when they're going out to perform and perform well. But what I wasn't aware of was like during this COVID Olympics, like they were having to isolate in hotel rooms by themselves and waiting to find out if they even got to compete to get their test results or if they were an alternate, they might be called at any moment. Like, could you imagine being on the biggest stage in your life, having to do it by yourself without your coach, without your support? Like, even just hearing that, I was like, oh my God, my stomach's in a knot.
About anxiety, right?
And so I think hearing him speak about it from his lens and being such an advocate, he's like, it's a lot more than just getting out there and performing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see that's one thing that's so clear when you, participate in the Olympics and you're competing. What we see as spectators is so different than the experience because it's like, it's literally the tip of the iceberg, right? It's all packaged neatly and it's cut to the scene and, and then there's all the rest of it under the surface. And so absolutely. And on top of that, I think in Simone's case in particular, I would remember reading, I can't remember like the dates or how it lined up, but like there was some anniversary related to her trauma that she experienced in gymnastics. And as someone that's navigated trauma, she's human, and I think that being able to see that she's human too, we look at the top of the iceberg and it's easy for us to storytell. It's easy for us to think that they're like a different class of human than we are. Right. And I think that she's shown us in so many ways. And that's what Michael says constantly. We're human too. That's the message. And you'll hear that. Like that's my message to all of us, regardless of what level we perform at. Because we're human, we will feel, we will fall, and we'll navigate hard things. So yeah, that's being alone and isolated. And then you think about the level of uncertainty, like in sport. And this is the part that's like the dots haven't quite been connected explicitly for people. And so when you do so, it might sound funny, but Brene Brown talks about vulnerability, right? And like the what makes up vulnerability is the emotional exposure and risk and uncertainty. And so you think about those three things, like there's no greater vulnerability than sport, right? It's like, I mean, I'm maybe exaggerating, right? But that like we put ourselves in those positions. And so the level of uncertainty already, and like we talked about at the beginning, that like when our bandwidth not just as mothers and business owners and all that we were doing, and with some public facing component, but not right broadcast in the best Olympian like of all time, right, in our sport, that our bandwidth was tapped. And so they're humans too. And so their bandwidth was tapped. So then when these things come up, like I can only imagine, like, where is it coming from, right? Like there's only, at the end of the day, like we're all doing the best that we can and with the resources that we have. And there was so much that they were carrying, so yeah.
And I think, I mean, for a spectator, for someone who loves sports, my favorite aspect of it is when we are seeing like human emotion in sport, that connection, right? I think going down the rabbit hole of like, I think that's why Ted Lasso is such a popular show right now, human emotion, sport, and vulnerability. And again, that's what we want. So that, and again, we have to allow that too in terms of you're just not a performer for us, right?
Right. Most of them are kids. What is the average age of an Olympian?
I was watching skateboarding with my nephew who's like 8 or 9. And I think the winner, the girls, was like 13. I mean, that's crazy.
My daughter. I mean, I can't imagine. Yeah. That's a
And at that point, you know, so I was a teenager and like that, and I was 18, definitely not 13. And so, right, you're that space of, I'm just doing what I love. Like, I mean, of course I was chasing a dream, but I was just like swimming. Like that was, and so it was the after, like the wave of what comes next. Then you're doing these interviews and you're like, all of a sudden have this new title. And that's a whirlwind too. So I hope, and I'm not like, as I say this, I'm not so confident that it's the case. I think we've made strides in supporting athletes. I just don't know that the infrastructure is there, which is why I feel like I'm doing the work I'm doing in the world and linking arms with others who are doing the same thing, because it's 21 years since I swam, you know, Michael swam in his first Olympics. Like it's 2021, like we can do better, right? We know what things can help support our athletes. We know what things can help on the protective side. So it's like, okay, so let's do it. Like, let's do it, you know, especially for that 13-year-old, you know, I mean, so young, taking in that experience.
And that's what I was going to ask again, like mental health being like, I'm putting air quotes, a hot topic of the Olympics and sports. And for me, I'm hoping that continues to stay. What do you think is being talked about, or what else is, again, using that momentum and moving forward? Have you been hearing some things, or what's going on in that world? Do you think that hopefully that's still happening?
Yeah, I think so. From in my experience, like just the way that I saw things was, you know, COVID and the pandemic, like that ripped the Band-Aid off of many eyes, like in a way where it forced us to look at what we didn't really want to turn toward because it's uncomfortable, because we got our own stuff. And so I think coaches were handed a lot, right? Because they were maybe not able to be with their athletes in the same way. So then they were serving them in a different way, seeing them in a different way, like on Zoom or whatever. And they're the front lines, in many cases, seeing kids more than their parents. So I think that they were forced to see what maybe they knew was there, but didn't know how to handle, or didn't know what, right. It was just kind of this in your face thing. So I think that's what, so 2020, there was a lot of momentum. And then in early 2021, there was this like window of things are kind of getting better. And so then it, you know, starts to subside a bit. And so I hope that there's enough momentum. I mean, this is what I'm committed to. I feel like I'm called to do this work and to continuing to, you know, whether it ebbs and flows, like, okay, but that we cannot stop at stories, that we have to have the infrastructure changes and the culture change when it comes to how we talk about mental health.
Absolutely.
Because we still talk about it as if it's mental illness. You know, it's like, well, let's address, like when a challenge comes up, it's like, okay, let's talk about mental health. Well, we all have it. It's 5 out of 5 of us, you know, and so it's, I think what I realized after the initial push of 2020, where coaches were kind of scrambling and parents were scrambling to put together programming to support, like once sport came back, it felt like a little bit of a, oh, okay, the kids are happy again. Like, let's go back to the way it was.
Yeah.
So, you know, in harnessing the energy and continuing to come back to that message of like, it's still here. I mean, UNC just shut down its campus yesterday, right?
Oh, really?
After 2 deaths of students. Yeah.
Oh God, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, we've had loss, and that is, you know, suicide is still the second leading cause of death for persons 10 to 34. And it's very real. And also there are so many more ways that we struggle when it comes to our mental health and suffer. And so addressing that and bringing all of us together, like this is a collective, 5 and 5, we all navigate challenge. For some of us, myself included, it dips into that space of mental illness. But really, we've got to do a better job of learning how to navigate internal discomfort, like
absolutely
fear, uncertainty, like just it's all our human experiences. And like, what do we do when we lose control, right? Or we don't have as much control as we thought we did? What do we do when we feel afraid? Do we let that drive our actions, or do we? So I think those kind of bringing those conversations and continuing to keep them in the forefront is going to take that, like, this is all of us. Like, we don't get to opt in or out of having mental health. Like, this is something that we all navigate. So yeah. So I think that's been my take. I'm curious what you think, like what your thoughts are too, the momentum in the work.
Again, I agree. I think it is, we're talking about it more, but you're right. I think, again, and then it is about this, like, how social media is used and like, okay, these are the topics, but what is going on underneath to actually make it better, the work, the infrastructure, right? And I think that's just how we view media. It's so quick. What's the next best thing? What's the next topic? I'm like, yeah, but we haven't solved this.
Yeah.
It hasn't gotten better. So again, that's my hope too of the support needed. It's just not something that needs to be talked about during an Olympics.
Yeah, and I think that always goes back to the now what, like, okay, so, we had an interview earlier today and we're talking about what resources were provided for you. None. I had to go out and seek it myself. Well,
my own money,
a 20-year-old athlete is not going to know how to search for a mental health clinician or even know what's out there or what's normal, what's been normalized, versus something that they could get more skills or support on. So I'm with you. I think the conversation has started, which is needed, but we can't just stop there. It has to keep going and going and going, which is why we know you are such a pivotal changer in sport. You don't just see it, you try to create the change. So tell everybody about your kind of baby whole health sport.
Yeah. So in 2020, do we have time for me to share the backstory?
Oh, please do. Yeah.
Okay. So I stumbled upon this training online, like this mental health first aid, which is becoming more of a name that people are like, when I interact with people and they're like, oh, I've heard of that, or maybe, or, it's becoming more familiar, but I'd never heard of it. And I was like, what is this? On like some Google rabbit hole I was on looking up something while writing, right? Like, this is way before the pandemic. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Okay. So I need to take this because what I'm reading feels like this is like a missing piece. And in the work I do, I am I'm athlete facing, I'm adult facing, like I'm working with clients one-on-one, and I'm not a clinician. I'm not clinically trained. I'm an educator, and I have this ability to help people with high performance. And so I'm like, I want to take this. So I took it, and it stirred me because I was like, oh my goodness, I've had all the labels. Like, I've navigated anxiety and PTSD and trauma and childhood trauma and an eating disorder, depression, like all of these things. And it changed the way I saw myself. It gave me language and a skill set that I was like, oh my gosh, it was life-changing for me, and how I saw myself, how I saw and talked about mental health and mental illness. And then the whole time I was like that person in the training, like raising my hand, like, okay, what about this? Because
good for you.
It was designed, the type, right? That was totally me.
That's us. Yeah.
I was thinking,
that's how we got the podcast.
Right. That's so funny. I was thinking of coaches and club coaches because they kept referring to this internal support system, which as an educator, I was part of. Like, I walked many students down to the guidance counselor's office, and I had the ability to do so because I was within a system and a structure where I would just pass off the child, who needed help or may needed help, right? And club coaches and coaches, youth sport coaches, like, some colleges don't even have that. So I'm just like, okay, so they can become the bridge. Let's help them build resources. So I eventually got trained in becoming an instructor, and it was there that I met who's now one of the co-founders of Whole Health Sport, Lynn Hendon-Huggins, and she is 3-sport athlete, like in college, and she's been a pivotal, you say pivotal is like the word of the day here, mentor and support for me. And her ability, she's trained over like 13,000 people and started a nonprofit, and her ability to just get this world of being able to serve and empower people with the skill set that they need to handle crisis situations. So we connected instantly, and I'm like, how do we bring this to sport? I think she played 2 or 3 sports in college as an athlete, and it's like, okay, like let's do this. And then literally 2 weeks later, I was at an event for Beyond Sport in New York City on a panel, and a woman in the audience who's now our third partner, which is Dr. Katie Kilty. We instantly connected over, I think I had shared something from the stage that was probably like Brene Brown influenced. And then we connected because she's, one of Brene's Dare to Lead certified instructors, and she's been in sports psychology for 20 years and is a professor. And so she became a mentor. So in 2020, I think I'm learning to embrace, like, one of my gifts is to just see problems and see the solution, like, up in the sky, right? Like this dream, and then to be able to pull it down and create it on the ground. And so I called them together, and introduced them. They've actually still never met in person, which is wild. And we formed Whole Health Sport to serve the sporting community, and although it's stretching to schools as well, to provide the infrastructure. So we utilize mental health first aid training as a part of Whole Health Sport. Like, it's one of the components because it so strongly helps to skill up, right? Like you were saying, it's hard to differentiate between like typical behavior and then when to worry, right? Like teenagers and tweens are not necessarily the easiest to navigate that space,
we were
right?
just
Like
talking about that.
I got a tweenitude in the house.
Tweenitude, I love it. Oh yeah, and I love it because that's the age I taught. So I like play. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is fun.
It's fun.
Oh, and also, right, when you lay your head down at night as a mom, you're like, oh goodness, am I doing everything? Like,
right.
Yeah. So we came together. What our work is in offering workshops and then the formal certification. It's a 3-year cert. And then what we do on the back end is we've created a community where we then walk them through. Because how many times have you been to a conference with like all the ideas, and then it's like back to work, and you're either totally in paralysis. Yeah. Or like, so what we've done is created this skill drill drip. It's like, how do you take this work and bring it to the ground? And the feedback has been humbling, a little bit overwhelming as I, fully step into myself and, the gifts and the work that we're doing and the power of it, because it's been transformative in kids' lives. Like, so when you impact the people who are then leading our kids, it's just been, to hear the stories has been, I think, my, the most humbling part, where you're like, okay, this is really helping empower you, which is allowing you to have the confidence to say something, the language to say something, and then turn toward the resources to get these kids the support that they need. And sometimes, it's like when you have an EMT who's responding, right, then they bridge, like sometimes they can provide the care that's needed, whether it's just like a Band-Aid or whatever, or they have to transport to like the surgeon at the ER. And in the same way, when you are mental health first aid certified, like it might just simply be listening.
Yeah.
Like that might be mental health first aid, and that might be what they need. And so it's been, so that's what we essentially have been doing. And when you ask about like the movement around, from the Olympics and the momentum, I think this is where I'm curious. I'm not going to like rush to judgment, but I'm curious because there's a lot of interest. And then when the rubber meets the road and people have to invest, it's been very interesting.
I bet so.
like we believe this is so important. We support this. And then it's like, okay, do it.
Right.
Well, and
so,
you and I have had this conversation numerous times. I think everybody goes, oh, well, it's the psychologist but in the trenches, it's the athletic trainer, it's the coach.
Yeah.
It's the parents that are, seeing those kids and, they don't seem like themselves. The youth coaches, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's everybody's responsibility.
They're in it. Yeah.
And they play a crucial role to be able to be that person that can be the EMT. I think that's a big missing piece is they're always thinking it's somebody else, but we all need to be vested.
Totally. We play like I say, we play hot potato. It's like whose fault is it? Like whose responsibility? And I actually presented at a coaches conference recently, and I had a very young coach say, I struggle myself. And so I'm a little like concerned with how this will be for me, like to be, the one sharing and connecting. And I said, it might not be you then, but you do call someone in, right? So like when we see something, we might not have the bandwidth in that moment, but we make sure that we call someone in who's also trusted to be able to be that support, right? So that it's not just like tossing it on to others, and also we're respecting our own, like what we're capable of without forcing ourselves to do it the right way.
Just thinking, from the therapist point of view, talking to my clients, I think for everyone, it's not just one person we depend on. And I talk about who's your safety net, right? And that's your team of people versus just one who's taking the responsibility and especially for young adults, right? Again, like when it's a coach and an athletic trainer and a parent and, right, like you feel held by that team of that community, right? That it's just not one person that we're pointing the finger at or gets that responsibility, and that they can turn to so many other people who are comfortable with that role.
And that's it, right? Is that one person is the number one protective factor, that one trusted adult. And so that, and also you see different sides of the person, like they reveal different parts of you. So like you say, athletic trainer, they're seeing a different version of an athlete than the coach, So that's beautiful. I love that. I can feel it, as you were saying, held, like that web, that net.
Yeah.
Right. And everybody, I can remember playing in college. There was this, she still comes to the home games, but she like would make us bookmark and would always at home games like be opening the door for everybody to come in, and she'd be like, where's that smile? Like, I mean, she was used to having the interaction, but just somebody like that was part of like getting you like in a good mood and having somebody that was cheering you. Like every person has an opportunity to be a loop in the net.
Part of that. Yeah. A loop in the net.
Loop in the net.
Did we just
oh my
come
gosh,
up with
yeah,
something here? Are you the loop
I
in
love
the net?
it.
Be a loop.
To the safety net.
That's so real though. And that there's, that she saw you, and that connection is what we are such a lonely collective.
Yeah.
And that loneliness and the isolation added to that, right? And so when we can connect, like that's the antidote. That is like, that's how we can recharge. We have to let people see us, right? We have to be willing and have that trust there. Yeah. So how powerful. I love that.
Goosebumps. Being seen, being heard, that connection.
Be a loop.
Be a loop in the net.
Be a loop in the
Be
net.
a loop.
Well, no wonder this has been so popular. You just talking about it, I'm like, ooh, I'm sure a lot of people are fired up and wanting to be a part of this. And again, you've had quite, a year and a half yourself. So kind of going back to how are you balancing the fit philosophy out there, Samantha? I'm sure you've been finding out a lot about yourself and transitioning and pivoting too. So tell us a little bit about that part.
Lots of pivots.
So many pivots and so much healing, and I think that it's like, it's so cliche and also so real. It's like in those rock bottom or those darker times, you just like, there's so much revealed to you if you're willing to listen and sit with it. And I think grace has been my word. It's like being able to meet myself and shift from the biggest shift over this last like 18 months has been the small pauses through the day versus feeling like I've got to commit to that, like 45 minutes or that, like this, like in order for it to count, which I didn't realize how much that was still sticking around. Right. And so being able to do a walking meditation or just literally simply go outside and take some deep breaths with my feet on the ground and take time. I take baths. I love taking baths, to read. And so that's like my space to check in with myself. And I realized that, I'm not always like, I'm falling short quite a bit on that, right? Where I like have bump up against my own guardrails and I'm like, okay, time to come back. But I've learned what those are so I can come back faster, right? So when I'm holding tension in my jaw, or my belly, or I'm just feeling like that sense of urgency, I know that that's the time to kind of put it down and to move toward things that are healing for me. So yeah, I think that, whether it came when I was doing homeschool, like planning their lessons at 11 o'clock at night, like sometimes it would come in those quiet hours, so then I wouldn't be up as early because there was, so there's that flexibility, but giving myself grace instead of judging myself, I think that's been the greatest shift. It's been internal of how I meet myself.
It's a good one, an important one.
I know. I think we could talk with her all day, but unfortunately it sounds like she's got, I like how she said zoom the verb. That's true. Like, it's like universal language. Totally. Zoom in.
Right. Gotta go zoom. Yes. Yeah, and then Zoom fatigue and all the things.
Oh,
so this is
it's real.
To connect on the phone. Yes. Yeah.
Well, Samantha, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Thank you so much for being the change.
Oh my gosh.
And you got Karen and I fired up.
I know. Keep doing what you're doing. I can't wait to keep following you.
Thank you. And thank
work.
you for, if I could like duplicate to y'all like so many times over.
Oh,
that's real too. Right?
I don't know that everybody feels the same thing about me. Everybody loves Karen.
I'd say that. I like to be duplicated in my house.
Oh, that would be nice. Well, you have a great rest of your day, Samantha. Bye, Queens.
Bye.
Today's episode is brought to you by yours truly. I'm excited to announce the releasing of my book, Finding Your Sweet Spot in Sport, Avoiding Relative Energy Deficit in Sport, also known as RED-S, by optimizing your energy balance. Be sure to follow me on social media or go to my website, www.beccamccombel.com. Bye, Queens.
For additional information on today's topic and guests, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Fit for a Queen.
And hashtag Fit for a Queen.
Don't forget to rate us on iTunes. We can't wait for you to join us next time on Fit for a Queen.
Bye, Queens.